Yes.
Okay, I like that.
So where do we even begin with this? I mean, one of the things that really struck me as I was reading through this is this idea that we need to shift from this like
Yeah.
fixing mentality to a loving mentality.
Mm,
It's so true. And you know what's fascinating about this is that it challenges that deep-seated urge we have to fix our family members.
yeah.
It's a total perspective shift
Mm.
from fixing to loving like Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And the text really argues that before we even think about, communication techniques or strategies,
Mm.
we need a heart change.
Yeah.
That's where it starts.
Okay, so let's unpack this heart change a little bit because you're right. The source material is very clear that this isn't some kind of like secular self-help strategy. It's
Right.
rooted in faith.
Absolutely. This text dives deep into Scripture, emphasizing that our communication should mirror the love of Christ. That powerful verse from 1 Corinthians 13:4 to 5. It describes love as patient and kind, not envious or boastful.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty stark contrast to how we often communicate,
Yeah.
especially when family tensions run high.
Yeah, it's like we're so quick to jump into problem-solving mode that we
Yeah.
forget to lead with love.
Exactly.
But then the text goes on to lay out these Christ-centered communication principles. And I have to admit, when I was reading through that list, I was a little overwhelmed. Like,
There are a lot.
there's so many. Where do we even start? So what really stood out to you?
Oh, there are so many. It's hard to choose. But speaking truth in love and extending grace,
Mhm.
those two really deeply resonate with me. I think they have the power to, completely transform family dynamics if we can put them into practice.
Okay, those are so relevant to like our everyday life. So let's break them down. For the listener, speaking truth in love, what does that actually look like when you're dealing with a teenager who's constantly pushing boundaries or an aging parent who's making decisions that you maybe don't agree with? How do you balance honesty with compassion in those moments when it's really tough?
Yeah. It's about approaching the conversation in a way that you're recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of the other person.
Yeah.
Imagine talking to that teenager, not with a lecture, but with genuine concern and a willingness to understand their perspective. Instead of asking, why are you always on your phone? You could try, hey, I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time online lately. Is everything okay? It's about creating that safe space for dialogue.
So it's not about avoiding tough conversations or sugarcoating things.
No, not at all.
It's about how we approach them
Exactly.
with love as that like guiding principle.
Love has to be the guiding principle. And, when it comes to an aging parent making choices that you might not agree with, it's about finding a way to express your concerns respectfully
Right.
while also affirming their autonomy.
No.
So, for instance, instead of saying, you can't do that, you could say, I understand this is important to you and I want to support you.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the potential risks and benefits together? It's about walking that tightrope of honoring their experience and their wisdom while still expressing your concerns.
And then there's extending grace, which I think is one of the toughest things to do, especially when family members hurt us or make decisions that we just think are wrong.
Oh, it is so hard.
But the text reminds us that we're all imperfect and in need of grace ourselves.
Absolutely. The text highlights that grace isn't about condoning hurtful behavior, but it is about choosing forgiveness and understanding, even when it's hard.
Right.
We have to remember that everybody's on their own spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And we should offer the same compassion that we hope to receive.
That makes total sense. But how do we balance that with accountability? Like, let's say there's a serious issue that comes up within the family.
Right.
How do we make sure that things don't just get swept under the rug in the name of grace?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's about creating a culture of accountability that's
Right.
rooted in love.
Yeah.
So while we extend grace and understanding, we also create healthy boundaries and expectations. It's about recognizing that growth takes time, offering support, but not enabling harmful actions.
So it's like holding someone accountable while still extending that Christ-like compassion and understanding?
Precisely. And this is where that concept of speaking the truth in love comes back into play.
Yeah.
It's about delivering that truth in a way that helps the other person grow and move towards positive change, not just tearing them down.
That's really insightful. One thing that struck me in the text is how it connects godly communication with those love languages. It's like we need to understand not only what to say, but how to say it in a way that our family members will truly hear and receive.
Oh, that's a brilliant connection. The text really emphasizes that people give and receive love differently, and when we speak each other's love languages, it's like we're turning up the volume on our message.
I love that analogy. So let's take words of affirmation. How would that look different when we apply the lens of godly communication?
Think about it this way. Instead of generic praise, you're intentionally affirming character qualities that are aligned with your faith. For example, instead of just saying good job to your child, you might say, I'm so proud of your honesty and how you stood up for what you believed in, even when it was difficult.
So you're not just praising the action, but you're connecting it to a deeper value that you want to cultivate.
Exactly. You're speaking life into those qualities.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just children. Think about how powerful it can be to affirm your spouse's generosity or your parents' perseverance,
Hmm.
especially when they're going through a difficult time. It's about seeing the good in them, even when it's hard to see, and speaking that truth into existence.
It's like we're reminding them of who they are in Christ, even when they might have forgotten.
Yes.
And speaking of connection, what about quality time? How does that love language become a powerful tool for godly communication?
Think about family prayer or devotional time. It's not just a box to check off, but an intentional moment to connect with God and with each other. It's a time to share your hearts, seek His guidance, and build unity through a shared faith.
And it doesn't have to be a super formal sit down thing every day. It could be like a spontaneous prayer before a meal or a quick conversation about a verse that spoke to you.
Absolutely. The key is to create those sacred spaces in everyday life where you can connect on a deeper level, even if it's just for a few minutes.
Now, I'm really intrigued by this concept of moving from fixing to loving because it seems like the core theme of this whole text.
It is.
What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's one of the most profound and challenging ideas in the whole text.
Uh,
It's about letting go of our need to control outcomes and trusting that God is at work at each of our family members. We can't change people, only God can, but we can create an environment where they feel loved and supported as they go through their own process.
that's such a relief because sometimes I feel so burdened by trying to fix everyone's
It's
problem.
exhausting.
It's exhausting. So you're saying it's about surrendering that need to be right or to have all the answers.
Yes, exactly. It's about releasing that burden and trusting God's plan. And this reminds me of that powerful verse from Luke 6:37, do not judge and you will not be judged. Think about how often we judge our family members, even unconsciously. This verse challenges us to approach them with compassion and understanding instead.
That's so true. It's like we're called to love them unconditionally, flaws and all, just like God loves us.
Yes.
Instead of trying to mold them into who we think they should be,
Right.
we're called to support them on their journey toward becoming who God created them to be.
Beautifully put. That shift in perspective can be absolutely life-changing, both for the person receiving that love and the person giving it.
Now, I love that the text doesn't just leave us with these lofty concepts. It actually dives into some really practical ways to apply these biblical communication principles. And one that really stood out to me was active listening.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
The text references James 1.11, quick to listen, slow to speak.
Love that verse.
But how do we truly listen with that Christ-like compassion and understanding, especially when we're dealing with family members who have very different opinions? I mean, it's so easy to get defensive or jump in with our own perspective before they've even finished talking.
It is. It's
Yeah.
so easy.
Yeah.
But I think it's about making a conscious effort to be fully present in the conversation. It's more than just hearing the words. It's about giving your full attention, trying to understand the other person's perspective, and responding in a way that reflects empathy. Imagine your teenager comes to you upset about something that seems completely insignificant to you.
Right.
Instead of brushing them off, try saying, I can see this is really bothering you. Tell me more about it.
It's like we're putting aside our own judgments and assumptions and really trying to see things through their eyes, even if we don't necessarily agree.
You
And
got it.
sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply reflect back what we've heard just to let them know we're truly listening. That's such a simple but powerful act. It can de-escalate tension, create a space for genuine connection, and open the door for a much more productive conversation.
Speaking of productive conversations, let's talk about speaking with grace. Colossians 4:6 tells us, let your conversation be always full of grace. What are some practical things we can do to make sure our words are uplifting even in challenging conversations?
Yeah.
Because it's easy to let those sharp words fly when we're feeling frustrated or angry.
Oh, it is. And you're right. It's about going beyond just avoiding harsh language.
Right.
It's about choosing words that build up instead of tearing down, instead of offer encouragement. Instead of saying, you always do this wrong, you could say, I know this is tough, but I believe in you.
Yeah.
It's about speaking truth, yes, but doing it in a way that conveys respect and kindness.
So it's about recognizing that our words have power.
Yes, they do.
And choosing to use them to build each other up, not tear each other down.
And
Exactly. And sometimes the most gracious thing we can do is simply choose silence. If we feel ourselves getting heated or tempted to say something hurtful, sometimes it's better to step away, cool down, and pray for wisdom before continuing the conversation.
That's such good advice. You know, the text acknowledges that conflict is inevitable in any family, but it emphasizes the importance of handling it God's way. It mentions Matthew 18.1517, which outlines a process for resolving conflict within the church. But how do we apply this to our families?
That passage provides a clear framework for approaching conflict in a way that honors God and seeks reconciliation. It's all about prioritizing direct, honest communication that is grounded in love and respect. The first step is addressing the issue privately with the person involved. This helps prevent gossip and creates a safe space for honest conversation. The goal is to truly understand each other's perspectives and find common ground.
So, no running to other family members to vent or gossip before talking directly to the person involved.
Exactly. That only creates division and resentment. If a one-on-one conversation doesn't resolve the issue, the next step is to involve a trusted third party, like another family member, a pastor, or a counselor.
Someone who can offer wise counsel and help facilitate a healthy conversation. But what if that still doesn't work? The text talks about bringing the issue before the church, but I'm not sure that's always practical in a family setting.
Right, so in a family context, it might involve seeking guidance from a pastor, counselor, or a respected elder in your community. The key is to be willing to seek outside help when needed, and to approach the entire conflict resolution process with a posture of humility and a genuine desire for restoration.
And throughout this process, prayer is essential, right? I feel like that's been a recurring theme in our conversation so far.
Absolutely. Prayer is the bedrock of godly communication. Before, during, and after those difficult conversations, we need to be on our knees, inviting God into the process, asking for His wisdom, guidance, and for softened hearts in ourselves and the other person.
It's about surrendering our own agenda and allowing God to work in the situation.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly difficult, especially when we feel like we're right or that our way is the best way.
Mhm.
But when we surrender to God's will, we open ourselves up to His transformative power. And that's where true healing and reconciliation can begin.
This is so powerful. We've been focusing on individual conversations, but the source material takes it a step further, talking about creating sacred spaces for communication within the family.
hmm
What do you think about that?
I think it's a beautiful concept. It's
Mhm.
about being intentional, about creating opportunities for spiritual connection, not just during times of conflict,
Right.
but as part of your family's rhythm. It's like building a spiritual foundation that can support your family through those inevitable storms.
It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and forget to prioritize those moments of connection. But the text makes it clear that these moments are crucial for building a strong and resilient family.
It's true. And these sacred spaces don't have to be elaborate or time-consuming. It could be as simple as having a designated family prayer time each day, or gathering for a brief Bible study discussion once a week.
Or even just sharing a meal together without distractions and talking about your day, your hopes, your struggles. It's about finding those moments to connect on a soul level,
Yes,
to remind each other that we're not alone in this journey.
exactly.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into godly communication. Stay tuned.
As we think about these sacred spaces, I keep coming back to this point in the text about how these practical steps aren't just about polishing our communication techniques.
Right. It's not just about being more articulate or persuasive.
Exactly. It's about fostering a deeper spiritual connection within the family. It's like we're not just trying to be better communicators, we're trying to be more Christ-like in the way we relate to each other.
I love that, but it can also feel a little intimidating. How do we
Yes.
live that out, in the everyday chaos of family life?
That's where the beauty of creating those sacred moments comes in. It's not about, grand gestures or elaborate rituals.
Hmm.
It's about weaving those intentional moments of connection into the fabric of our daily lives.
So give me some examples for our listener who's like, okay, I get it, but what does this look like
Yeah.
practically?
Okay, so imagine this. Starting your day with a simple family prayer, even if it's just a few sentences spoken around the breakfast table,
Mm.
or setting aside a few minutes each evening to go around and share what you're grateful for. It doesn't have to be a big production,
Right.
just a small moment to pause and connect.
It's about creating those little pockets of time where we can intentionally connect with each other and with God.
Yes, and when we do those things consistently, we're creating a culture of faith within our homes.
Yeah.
We're making God a part of our everyday conversations, not just a Sunday topic.
This ties back to those love languages we were talking about before, right?
Right.
We're expressing love in a way that speaks to our family members' hearts and nourishes their souls at the same time.
Precisely. For one family member, it might be through words of affirmation during family prayer, speaking those blessings over each other.
Hmm.
For another, it might be that quality time, setting aside an evening for a family game night where you can just laugh and connect on a deeper level. It's about finding those ways to make faith come alive in your family's unique dynamic.
It strikes me that this is so much more than just a list of communication tips. It's really about creating a family environment that is intentionally rooted in faith, love, and connection.
You hit the nail on the head.
Hmm.
The text really challenges us to go beyond simply trying to fix our family members and instead focus on cultivating a space where everyone feels loved, supported, and spiritually nurtured.
I love that picture. But let's be real. Life with family is messy.
Oh, it is.
Conflict is bound to happen.
For sure.
So how do we handle those moments when things get heated and those old communication patterns start to creep back in? How do we stay grounded in those godly principles when we're feeling triggered?
That's when those Christ-centered communication principles we talked about become so important.
Yeah.
When frustration and anger rise, it's easy to fall back on criticism, judgment, even yelling.
Oh, yeah.
But the text urges us to pause, take a deep breath, and ask ourselves, how would Jesus respond in this situation?
It's like we're taking a moment to realign ourselves with God's heart before we react.
Right. So instead of criticizing your teenager for a messy room, you might express your concern in a loving way and offer to help them tidy up.
Right.
Or if you're disagreeing with your spouse about a financial decision, you might approach the conversation with understanding and a desire to find a solution together. It's about choosing to respond rather than react.
It's like remembering that ultimately we're all on the same team,
Yes,
and the goal is to support each other, not to tear each other down.
absolutely. When we can
Yeah.
shift our focus from being right to being loving, it changes the whole dynamic of the conversation.
The text also talks about the importance of breaking free from those negative communication patterns that we may have inherited from our families or developed over time. This feels like some seriously tough inner work.
It can be challenging, but it's so freeing.
Yeah.
The text reminds us that we don't have to be prisoners of our past. We have the power through Christ to choose to break free from those cycles and create new, healthier patterns within our family.
Okay, so practically speaking, how do we start to break those old patterns? What's a good first step for our listener?
It all starts with awareness. Pay attention to those times when you find yourself reacting in a way that isn't aligned with God's love. Maybe you're quick to criticize or judge, or maybe you tend to shut down emotionally when conflict arises. Just notice those triggers.
So we need to identify those patterns, those go-to reactions that tend to pop up when we interact with our family members.
Exactly. Once you've pinpointed those patterns, you can start to challenge them. Ask yourself, where did this pattern come from? Is it truly serving me or my family? And most importantly, how can I choose to respond differently next time?
And that's where we can put those Christ-centered communication principles into practice,
Yes,
replacing those old negative patterns with new ways of communicating that reflect God's love.
that's it. Instead of criticism, we choose encouragement. Instead of judgment, we offer understanding. Instead of lecturing, we practice active listening. It's about rewiring our responses to be more in line with God's heart.
This is incredible. We're not just learning techniques, we're transforming our hearts and our families in the process.
And that transformation has a ripple effect. It extends far beyond our immediate families. We're setting an example for our children and for those around us, showing them what it looks like to live out our faith in a tangible way.
This whole conversation has been so inspiring. Before we wrap up this section, I want to touch on one more key concept from the source material, building spiritual unity within the family. What does that look like in a practical sense?
The text points to shared faith goals, joint prayer times, family worship, scripture reading, even service projects as ways to cultivate unity. It's about coming together as a family, not just for fun, but for spiritual growth and to serve others.
So instead of just focusing on individual growth, we're intentionally creating opportunities to grow together as a family.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to actively live out our faith together, to support each other on our spiritual journeys, and build a sense of shared purpose.
I love that idea. It could be something as simple as committing to read a specific book of the Bible together or volunteering at a local soup kitchen once a month.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming.
Yeah.
Small, intentional steps can make a big difference in building spiritual unity within the family.
And when we prioritize our faith as a family,
Yes.
we're building a strong foundation that can help us weather the inevitable storms of life.
You know what's striking me as we talk about all of this? This conversation has been about so much more than just communication. It's really about building a family culture that is centered around Christ and grounded in His love.
That's such a great point. It's not just about tweaking our words or becoming better negotiators.
Right.
It's about something much deeper. The text is challenging us to view our families not as just a group of individuals living under one roof,
Hmm.
but as a spiritual unit working together to reflect God's love to the world.
And that's a pretty powerful vision to hold on to, right? It gives us hope even in the midst of the messiness and challenges that are part of every family.
Absolutely. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up our deep dive into godly communication. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into godly communication. As we wrap up this episode, I'm just struck by how practical and yet transformative this whole concept is. It's not just like this vague ideal.
Yeah,
It's something we can actually start putting into practice like today.
I agree. And what really stands out to me is that it doesn't require like some huge personality overhaul or a complete restructuring of our families.
Right.
It's about making small but intentional shifts
Right.
in the way we interact with each other.
That's so encouraging because, let's be honest, change can feel overwhelming,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it comes to something as complex as family dynamics. But the source material gives us these like bite-sized, actionable steps to get started.
Yes, it does. And it all starts with prayer, which has been such a key theme throughout this entire conversation. We need to invite God into this process, seeking his wisdom and guidance every step of the way.
I love how the text emphasizes that prayer isn't just some kind of formality.
Right.
It's about like surrendering our own ideas and agendas and aligning our hearts with God's will for our families.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers
Mhm.
and inviting God to work in us and through us.
So for our listener who's thinking, okay, I'm ready to dive in, where do I begin? What would you say is like the most important first step?
Start with a simple, heartfelt prayer. Just ask God to reveal those areas where your family communication needs improvement. Ask for the courage to let go of old patterns and the grace to love your family members unconditionally, even when it's hard.
It's like we're handing the reins over to God and saying, I trust you to lead the way.
And in that surrender, we open ourselves up to the transformative power of his love.
And once we've prayed, what's next? The text talks a lot about creating those sacred moments. What does that look like, practically speaking?
It's about looking for those small opportunities throughout your day to connect with your family on a spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it could be saying a prayer before meals. Maybe it's reading a Bible story together at bedtime, or taking a few minutes to go around and share what you're grateful for.
It's about finding those natural rhythms in your family life and like infusing them with an intentionality and faith.
Exactly. And the beauty is that these moments don't have to be elaborate or time-consuming. Even 5 minutes of focused family prayer or a quick conversation about a Bible verse that spoke to you can make a world of difference.
You know what I'm realizing as we're talking about this? It's not about achieving some kind of perfect communication utopia.
Right.
It's about making progress, not striving for perfection.
That's a crucial point to remember. We're all human, and we're going to mess up.
Yeah.
But godly communication isn't about performance. It's about grace.
So even when we stumble or fall back into those old patterns, we can always start fresh
Always.
with God's help.
Absolutely. Each new day is a gift, a chance to try again. To practice these principles, to seek God's guidance, and to love our families a little bit better.
That's incredibly freeing. It takes the pressure off having to get it right all the time
Yes.
and allows us to approach this whole journey with humility and grace.
And as we embrace this journey, we begin to see those transformations happening, not just in our communication patterns, but in our hearts and in the hearts of our family members. Our families become less about individual agendas and more about reflecting God's love.
This has been such a rich conversation, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
I know, right?
But if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's that godly communication is possible.
It is.
It's not just a pipe dream.
Yeah.
It's something we can all experience in our families.
And it starts with taking that first step, that first prayer, that first intentional act of love. As we do that, we open ourselves up to the incredible possibilities that God has in store for our families, and we begin to experience the transformative power of his love in a whole new way.
Thank you so much for diving into this topic with me. It's been truly enlightening.
It's been a pleasure.
And for you listening, remember, you're not alone on this journey. We're all in this together, seeking to build stronger, more connected, and more Christ-centered families.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into godly communication. We hope you'll join us next time as we explore another fascinating topic. See you then.